Hey, everybody. We have Rachael Shores here with me. I opened this up to a community thing. I think people are really busy and things are crazy, as we all know. Rachel is a trooper. She showed up. It's 1:30 in the morning in Germany right now. And she's here with me. So I figured, why not just do a dialogue about what's going on, experiences, just see what comes up. I love talking to Rachel. She's the one who does the amazing luminary paintings that I use in a lot of the content I put out there, right? The gorgeous moon painting. She's done Venus, Mercury, Jove. Uh, After this, reach out to her, like check out some of her artwork. It's really good. And yeah, so we were chilling, and I figured I always love our dialogues. Cool stuff always pops up. So she's a champ. She was down to go on video recording at 1:30 in the morning with me, and so we'll just see what happens, chat a bit, and put this out. See if there's any insights that can come up for people. Maybe talk about ways to deal with anxiety and stress. How are you feeling right now through all this?
Um, I'm good. I'm feeling I'm actually feeling pretty low energy.
Okay.
I'm good, but I mean, I'm kind of tired, but I'm a night person, so it doesn't really have much to do with it. I am trying to be quiet.
Okay. There's a little bit, I think something might be hitting your mic. So there's a little bit of like static or something happening. Um,
Yep. I had it sitting on my knee.
okay, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I feel it. We had an earthquake last night at like 1 in the morning. So I feel you on, or maybe 2 in the morning. I feel you on the tired bit. Um, yeah, I mean, these are crazy, crazy times right now. Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
I think processing it
yeah.
definitely has a lot of effect on people and their energy levels. What were you gonna say? Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna go into like my reaction so far. Like the first bit was like I went deep into like what day was it? Monday, Tuesday. I was Monday. I don't remember what day. It seems like it's all going by really fast, but like was just like complete despair because I was like real. I'm really worried. Like I just see this as like this is the end of the United States economy, and all my friends are just gonna have the worst times ever. And I was feeling more bad about for other people and feeling more guilty that I wasn't feeling the fear and the stress. And then so I just kind of took it on
Mm.
as my, civic duty. And then um that didn't go well. And so then I had a nice kind of coaching session. I went back, reset, and realized that faith and trust in the big picture is I'm more natural at that, so I'm feeling better that way. But
Awesome.
now I'm just like I'm still kind of on this feeling like I shouldn't do anything. I made a list of all the things I can do while I'm isolated, and it's my to-do list for my usual week. Like this is what I do. I stay home. Like it shouldn't be affecting me at all. And now I'm just like it's just heavy. Like I laid on the floor most of the night tonight.
Okay,
I don't know.
for sure. I feel you there. I think you raised like a few really good points that would be cool to kind of like jump into. Like one is like the state the state of what's happening in the United States. It would be interesting to hear the perspective of what's happening in Germany. I know it's very different. The United States reaction is very different than like the Balinese reaction. The other piece of this is taking on like the stress of the people you know, right? Wanting to empathetically kind of experience with them, or like I guess we would say like live vicariously if it was a good thing, but like we're like, but it's like, oh, I should be suffering with these people, right? And also the difficulty
Yeah.
comes when you've practiced enough conscious work to remain calm in a situation, And yet the like empathic emotional aspect is like, but I really should be bawling right now for all these people, right? I think that's a really interesting thing that we can dive into also. And then the third piece is like, okay, goals and goal setting, right? A part of that requires that we have a framework or an understanding that the world will remain somewhat consistent so that our goals fit into a projection into the future, right? Which has been one of the existential difficulties, I feel like, for people for a few years now, and especially for the youth right now, right? Like growing up, I don't know about you, but me, like growing up, my like childhood was in the 90s, right? It really wasn't, we were very sheltered from a lot of the global issues in the United States. So we, at least in my childhood, where was raised in Southern California, conservative parents, we weren't thinking about like global warming, like that. My parents raised us to believe it was a myth, right? Like we still kind of had faith in our politicians as long as they weren't Democrats. But like even Democrats, like as a conservative when younger, totally flipped political votes. But like even Democrat presidents, like no one thought like Clinton was doing absurd things, right? We were like, oh, like they were like, oh, sex affairs, but they weren't like, is he like the Manchurian candidate? Like, what is going on right now, right? So we had a consistent worldview of like this life will probably progress as it is into the future. I can understand what the world around me will look like up to the point I die, probably, right? And then goals make sense in that. I'm gonna go to college, I'm gonna do this career, I'm gonna do XYZ. As we moved into the 2000s, and especially after the Global Trade Center and the 2008 stock market crash and the housing bubble burst, all those perceptions for, I know for millennials, started to crash, right? And then suddenly
Mm.
we're living like two trajectories, right? What happens if the world does stay similar? Okay, well, here's my 5, 10, 15-year plan, which everyone says is super important to have. But then there's this other in the back of your mind, well, what happens if it all collapses? Because that is actually a very real possibility right now, right? And I feel like it's particularly potent for the youth. Like I hear this a lot where they're like, we don't know what's happening. And if you don't have a framework for the brain to be able to piece your goals into, right, it's very hard to motivate the brain to do anything because it will instead just go into like lockdown mode of like, let's lie on the ground because like what is the point of painting gorgeous paintings if the world is going to end tomorrow? Like, I don't know what any of these goals amount to, right? Um, so differences in cultural reactions to what's happening. What was our second? I didn't get much sleep last night. Second point, I think, was taking on the burden of other people's experiences in the state and feeling guilty for kind of having a very like a very calm perspective. And thirdly, the existential crisis of all this and how it affects goals. Which door do we want to go through? Which one seems most interesting to you at first?
Um, well, right now, let me just, I would like to share how it is in Germany right now, because it's like, this is, I think is so important. Just like what you said, like in America, we've been always been clueless. Like, it's just, I was like, oh, this is how it is kind of thing. And like, what's sad, or I'm hoping what people are realizing is that there can be a different and better way, because like, Germany, like I don't pay attention to the news either side. So
Mhm.
I know Merkel just gave an announcement in a talk today, and in kind of addressing the nation and saying please keep it up kind of thing. I know that happened. I'm not really I didn't watch it. And then but everything that's happened I've learned from people and like other people passing on the information. And so like Sunday night is when the news came down, and everything's been like systematic, is what's interesting. They're like, okay, we're closing, borders are closing on this time and this day, and this border with who and with what, and there's been a constant like count. I think the counting has been more from my husband, who's on Reddit and stuff, and he's like, I was telling, and then like I always knew how many are in our town or have been exposed. Some, unfortunately, some doctors conference somewhere brought in about, was it 22 cases into Erlangen here, which is
Oh
like
no.
tiny, and now there's around 1,000.
Wow.
But somebody was saying like I don't know of anyone personally here that has it. I've heard of a couple, like this guy at a bar, his boss has the coronavirus, and somebody else's wife has it or something. Like, you kind of hear it like
Mhm.
re- removed like that. But I also did hear some, nah, this is the problem with rumors. Like, I can't remember who told me what, but some friend says their friend is working at the hospital and they're already maxed out at respirators,
Oh, wow.
or ventilators, or whatever it is. Um, Even though nothing's around. But like, what's nice is like in Germany already, I know like they've already have in effect 3 months paid sick leave. Like, that's already a given. Like, just right there, just by moving here, it was like a weight was lifted off our shoulders. And we pay our healthcare is basically the same that we've paid in Germany, in the US, when we had a nice healthcare plan, except for that's all we pay. There's no copay, there's no pay when you go to the doctor's office or the hospital. You just write it off. I've been to the doctor, had checkups, got special written doctor's writing to get special medication for my when I was taking bipolar medicine. I went to psychiatrists, didn't pay anything for any of that. And so it's like really, and like they're already talking plans on how they're going to help businesses bail out. Like
Yeah.
I signed paperwork at work on Tuesday so I can get paid. And I have like a part-time job.
Yeah.
So it's just like people are annoyed and it's hard and it's difficult and it's like a little bit scary and uncertain, but it's not devastating.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's very much the case in Bali too. And so it's interesting to see differences here, right? Because a lot of what you're saying, the stability factor comes from a very involved government that has social security nets, governmental social security nets. In Bali, it's societal social security nets, right? The government is doing a decent job. They've suspended taxes, like they're doing. Indonesia doesn't have much money, so they're doing as much as they can with that money. They did a small economic stimulus package. Actually, it's pretty big for Indonesian economy, and they're suspending taxes for businesses and people for I think 3 months. There's no social health care here, but the locals aren't freaking out, right? And I think that when I sit down and I think about it, I think it's for a couple reasons. One, whoa, words. There's not as much fear of death here, right? Like people are exposed to death very early on. Like I was just at a funeral, right? And like you go and you touch the body during the prayer by the like before it goes off to the graveyard, right? And there was a little kid, like a 4-year old, like with her parents, and like you go to funerals for pretty much the entire village and your extended family, right? So I was thinking about it. I'm like, this kid probably has to go to like 3, 4, 5 funerals a year or something like that. Like, I don't know, that might be a drastic number and I might be overestimating, but you're going to consistently be around death. And the narratives they have about death is you get reincarnated, right? You die, like your family is going to maintain the ancestral altar, like they're gonna, like, that'll always be taken care of. You go up to the gods, they're gonna have ceremonies that bring you back so you can hang out with a family at times. And then when it's right for you, you get reincarnated somewhere, right? So there's not as much fixed identity with this life. And there's a lot of other social, cultural pieces that really lower fixed identity, from the naming system to the language and how it works around time and identity and stuff like that, right? It's just not as deeply ingrained as it is in the West, especially the United States, where it's all about individuality. And so I feel like there's less existential threat around dying in general. And then also people are very confident that okay, like, yes, they're stressing out that tourism is down, which is really the main effect right now from coronavirus. There aren't that many outbreaks in Indonesia. And most of those outbreaks have actually been people visiting Indonesia rather than like Indonesians. And so the main thing is that tourism is like dead here, which is what the entire economy survives on in Bali, at least. But they're confident, like, right? They have their land, they have their homes, they know like there's always going to be enough rice at the bare minimum, right? They're probably going to be able to eat rice and tempeh, and they're confident that like if they get in an economic hole, they have their extended family and like they will always be able to eat. This is something I heard in Burma too from the villagers. They're like, you can knock on anyone's door in the village. Like they were like, I believe you can knock on any door in any village in Burma, no matter who you are, and you will be fed, right? And at the end of the day, there is that cultural social security net, and you have a political society, like a political government social security net, right? And I feel, meanwhile, I was talking to my mentor, and she's zen as fuck most of the time, right? And she still was very zen, but she's like, it is a madhouse in Stockton right now. Like, you go to the grocery stores, they're all empty. And she grew up in the USSR, and she's like, I haven't seen this for a very long time. And whereas the USSR was a matter of bad planning, here it's a matter of just fear and phobia, right? There's no real reason to be stocking up the way that people are stocking up on with things like toilet paper and just absurd products half the time. But I feel like it's that existential threat, that fear of death is a lot higher, even for people in age groups that aren't as threatened, right? It's still very like worrying. And we're playing, there is no security net that we have confidence in, right? The security net is the individualist, you have to survive. And we're playing out the Hollywood movies where it is you against the
Yeah.
world. And so you better hoard all those resources because the government's not going to help you out. And if they did, then they're socialists and that's a home problem, right? And your neighbors aren't really going to help you out. Not a zombie apocalypse. We've seen those movies. And so it's this like fight of the individual, which has always been the American narrative, right? The pioneers in the wilderness, your family versus the world and God and nature. Um, and you see it playing out, and you see it playing out in a pandemic of fear and hysteria in a lot of ways. Apparently not everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm hearing reports that there are some communities that are keeping their shit together. Um, but it's interesting to see how the cultural conditioning in safety net structures really affect how people are dealing with these things.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah, and I think in the US, I think part of it too is like it's the bigger, I feel like it's the bigger cities are having the
Mhm.
more panic because it is, you are less self-reliant, like it is the money and the infrastructure that you need for your survival.
Yeah.
Like I know that, and I believe, my family is in Minnesota, and like they're, I bet you my aunt has a year's supply of canned food in her house right now. you know, she could probably feed my family, you
Yeah.
know. So there's a difference, and I was thinking about that too in Minnesota. I was like, oh my goodness. I was like, you know what? If it got down to worst case scenario, people could eat their livestock, they have
Yeah.
like, they could just go out and butcher one of their pigs, and start trading the meat.
Yeah.
Like that can happen, but it's the compact living where, you don't pay your bills, you don't get your light or your water, or electricity, or your cell service. You get kicked out of your home. Um, and yeah,
Yeah, that's a
that's
really good
that
point.
was
Yeah, because now that you bring that up, like I'm thinking, yeah, my dad's a pastor of a church, right, in a small town community. Like people have livestock. Like they probably like half the people he knows probably has like half a cow in their freezer right now, right? So as long as power doesn't go out, like they're gonna be able to eat for like a good long time. And I'm sure they will. if it gets really desperate, share those resources, right, amongst the church and amongst the community. Um, and so yeah, so we're looking at, so it's safety nets in social structures, but also urbanization versus rural self-reliance, right? And it's interesting because urbanization is also how you get pandemics like this, right? Well, I guess
Mhm.
this might not be it hasn't had enough time for us to tell if it's a pandemic. um, but urbanization, really intense population saturation, right, is how you get diseases like this and viruses like this that are able to mutate amongst a really dense, consistent population and cause this, right? And the world, what was it? It was just a few years ago. The world made the flop from a majority rural to a majority urbanized, right? I think within the last decade. Um,
Okay.
I'll have to, don't quote me on this, y'all. Like citations, I don't have those right now, but I remember that was something that came out just a little bit after college, I feel like. Um, so yeah, so now we can look at like social planning, societal planning, which I feel like we're definitely gonna have to do because the United States, especially, we are like, I don't think we can do status quo anymore, right? Like the way this is going to financially affect people is insane. Like we will have to either put a lot of band-aids on the current system, or ideally, I would really hope, start to envision and imagine a new system, right? Because it's clearly not working how it is. Um, thoughts?
Um, well, I was moving in, then I was thinking of the other, slight upside or what's been interesting to me when people look at it in the bigger picture of like nature running its course and how what this isolation, what is so amazing to me, what I wasn't expecting from this is nature, the result of nature, like just like all the articles of like Venice canals being clear, you know,
Yeah.
the water being clear, swans coming, dolphins coming and stuff. And somebody had listed a whole thing of like deer were coming into like Japanese cities or monkeys were coming into Thai cities, but I think the monkeys kind of run around those cities anyways. Well, I mean, not the big ones, I guess.
Really,
But
they're getting into like gang wars. Sorry. Going.
but yeah, like that's the part I'm actually kind of curious about because like what is it like if the whole world stops its consumerism for a little bit, like what is going to be the effects of it, and will that actually show some people that maybe we could make this a more lasting thing? Because I mean they're showing like they're showing those the radar results or the for like over Hunan province in China where all the factories had shut down for like a month or so, and it's like clear skies.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah.
like
And you've been to China,
that's like
right?
no.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I was in Thailand.
Clear skies in China. I was there for 10 days. I saw a patch, like a tiny patch of clear sky after like a monsoon storm. It was such a mess. It was blowing people down. Like my friend's mom got knocked over in the storm because it was so fierce. I had to like go pick up this like elderly man because he got knocked down in the street. Like, and all of that accomplished getting a patch of blue sky for like 5 minutes on my last day in China, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, I have been blessed with this view. Like to get blue skies and clear skies in China, like that is amazing, right? Like that is an amazing transformation from its typical state. Um, which I think this kind of can move into the existential question around goal settings too, right? Like I've been talking about this a little bit on social media, especially on Instagram. If we look at the astrology, right, like a very basic look at astrology is that Pisces season is about dissolving, right? It's very much about the stories we tell ourselves. It's very much about the dreams we play out. It's about our fantasies and our art and the way things arise and the way things dissolve, right? Um, And
Mm.
the way that our unconscious and these inner emotional events create a rising, and also how through exploring them we can see what needs to be dissolved. And what we're really getting right now is a dissolution of our common basic narrative, right? Like, how many people wake up and go to work because they're like, this is the way the world is. I need to go to work right now because I need to pay these bills, and I got 3 kids. I need to put a roof over the head, and I need to like eat, right? And this is how the world is. Like we're talking about earlier, like the 90s. This is how the world is. This is how it's always going to be. It's going to keep going, right? And then now the world has changed overnight, right? Like, we don't, like, a lot of people don't even have an option to go into work. And now we're like, well, what's going to happen, right? Is the government going to bail it out? How is it? Are we going to return to serfdom when this is all done because of the amount of debt that we have? Like, what's going to happen? All of those expectations of the world are slowly breaking down because the world is now different than the way that we have been experiencing it, right? So
Yeah.
our narrative right now, America is running with a Hollywood plague narrative. Germany is running with a like government helps narrative. Like, this is what happens. There's stability. This is why we have a good, strong, healthy government. Bali is playing with like, we've been through plagues a million times. This is a rising, falling, whatever. Like, we've been here for millennia. Like, in Hinduism, like, there is no creation. This, we've been doing this for trillions of lives. Like, no big deal, right? It's not even a drop in like a drop of water in the ocean. Like, it's nothing, right? So we're seeing how these
Really?
narratives are rising. Pisces is dissolving a lot of the modern narratives around like what life is. And it's a good time to start dreaming up new narratives and also start to really examine what are our goals, what are our priorities, and recognize which ones are fixed to a specific way of the world functioning, right? How many of our goals are tied specifically to a very modern um, late stage capitalism, right? Like, how many of our goals are like, these are the specific rungs of the ladder I have to climb to get my house, to get this career, to do XYZ, to get this car, right? And these goals, while making practical sense in that environment, in that society, also keep us tied into that environment, tied into that society, tied into that consumerism, tied in the very
Right.
society that's destroying the world environmentally, right? So we can start to look at that feedback loop, the way that we sustain the structure of that society. And we can also start to look at what goals remain regardless of what happens in the world around, right? My rituals are goals I maintain, and it doesn't matter if it's a capitalist society. It doesn't matter if like suddenly I find myself in a communist society. It doesn't matter. I mean, it might if they want to start like persecuting religion. Um, sorry, now I'm like going down a whole other tangent there in my mind. I feel you could do communism without the insane atheism of it. But anyways, coming back on track, right? There's specific things in my life that I know I want to be able to maintain regardless of what happens in the world around me. And those are some of the most important things in my life, right? So we can start to look at goals that survive existential crisis and goals that survive the breakdown of expected structures, right? And a lot of your spiritual traditions, that's what it's all about, right? Buddhism, remove attachments to the world, right? And if you're going to be a layperson, remove attachments to most of the world, figure out what's important for you so that if you're going to suffer, suffer for something that's worth it, right? Hinduism, like, remove attachments to the world, but practice your dharma, your actual calling, right? In that world. I think Christ and Jude and Christ and Jude, no, Christ and Christianity, a lot of the like the teachings were like, don't worry about storing up treasures. Don't worry about the politics of Rome and Israel. Don't worry about like all these like extraneous structural things. Kingdom of heaven is within you. Like, are you taking care of the people around you? Are you taking care of the poor? Are you taking care of the widows? Are you being a good person? Do you have a relationship with God? right? Like that was the basis of all of his teachings, right? You see it in a lot of these traditions. Um, so we can start to modify goals, I feel like. So I'm going to spring this on you. What would be like a goal that you would have regardless of structures?
Regardless of society structures, you mean? If I
Yeah,
was on my own?
yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you're saying all this because I'm like, oh yeah, I have all these ideas. I have all these plans that don't rely on anyone else. Um, I want to connect every day. So I try, I believe strong, my belief is God and being one with the universe. So I want to connect and feel that every day. So journal, meditate. I'm trying to take better care of my body now so so I can, so it can hold this, all the spiritual ideas and creativity. And so I want to do yoga and I'd like to create. And my big overarching goal for my life is telling my travel story.
Mm,
And which is so funny because it's like I just want, like, I was thinking about that. Like, I just want to write 20 minutes a day. Like, that's all I had told myself. I haven't written in like a week,
mm,
you know? But
yeah.
like, there's nothing stopping me. But like, now I'm just like, oh, no, I can't do that. I don't know. I think it's part of the whole, like, I think I'm still in the wallowing. I was gonna ask a question for you too, if you didn't have feedback after that.
Yeah, for sure. Um, let's get the question and then I'll respond to the whole piece.
Okay, so yeah, I think it relies part, um, 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 it fits with that because it's like my question is, it's like I do have a time. I'm calling this my time of wallowing. You call it Pisces. I like your version better. And it's just like I know it's a process, but like also I can also feel myself sink into it or I stay. Like I just decide to live there. And like, do you have advice of how to like go in and then move through instead of, like
Yeah.
push through? Because I yeah, that's my big question.
Making some notes myself. Okay, yeah. So there's a few pieces there, and I love that. Like I want to backtrack a little bit. Like, yeah, connect spiritually, right? Like every day I go down into the temple and I just sit there. I have a cup of. I gone back into coffee since Burma because it like they had decaf at the monastery, and I was like, I'm gonna do this thing. And I started realizing it was decaf because we were only getting like 4 hours of sleep. And I was like, I know this is just decaf, but I'm gonna pretend like it's coffee. And for some reason, I'm on this thing now where I have a cup of coffee a day, and I go downstairs and I'm in the temple, and I just have my cup of coffee in the temple, and I'm like, this is bliss, right? And I sweep it out, and I feel connected, and a lot of my rituals bring me back to that point, right? And I feel that's critical for it doesn't have to be religious. It could be a matter of let's connect to the self. I want to hold space for people and all their different beliefs. But I do feel it's critical to feel connected to something, right? That's what creates a larger narrative, a larger story that lets us move through a lot of the more difficult times, right? Rather, whether that is God, the mystery, the like big self, right? Or an existential concept of humanness and the human dynamic human spirit, right? Dealing with all the consequences of nature and evolution. But I feel that can be a powerful way of maintaining movement in these experiences. As for then there was one other point I want to make before getting to the grieving. I feel is really what it ends up being in a little bit of a way, right? is, if my brain will catch up to me again, it had it there and then it passed. Um, it would be interesting with that stall in the writing to recognize maybe how much of that is unconsciously still attached to the structure of the world around, right? Like I think for me right now, I started a few weeks ago. I started or a couple weeks ago. I started very every day making sure I'm writing in a particular book. Right. I'd done enough of my own wallowing. Pisces has been rough, y'all. I did enough of my own wallowing, and I started working on what we're going to talk about here, feeling into the actual emotions rather than just kind of like, okay, I feel they're there. Let's keep going. Started feeling into them. I'd spend the mornings kind of doing that, and then I'd spend the afternoons and evenings writing, right? And that's what really opened up the door for me to be able to enter into that more inspired state to continue writing, right? I feel like I've been able to maintain it amidst this crisis because there's still some part of me like that is like, okay, the life will just go back to normal and I'll have a book ready when it does, right? And we don't know about that. So your mind might be dealing with that uncertainty um, far more truthfully than my mind is dealing with that uncertainty. And if it is very uncertain, then there is a question, who are you writing the book for? Are you writing, like, would it be totally okay with you if you get your book done and it never leaves your computer or your journal? And would you still feel accomplished doing that, right? Like, oh, I wrote this book, I got it done, life is good, awesome. Like, this is what my goal was? Or is part of the goal around that is still tell your story to people, which is a great goal. Like, but does it require that external factor, which is now an uncertain factor? Will Amazon be here a week from now? Will like publishing markets be here a week from now? Who's going to publish this book? Where am I going to put it? Right. And now the brain is like, well, what's the point of fulfilling this goal if there's no one there? Right. If the goal becomes, I'm going to have this journal with chapters that I will read to my neighbors in the post apocalypse, then like that might be much more sustainable for creating the motivation to accomplish that goal in light of the existential crisis that we're in, where we're like, we don't know what the future holds. I was at dinner with some friends last night. Mainly, I've been isolated the last like week or two, just naturally, because it was like, I need to deal with the emotions and I need to write, right? But I was at dinner with friends and it was very surreal because we're all travelers. We're all there were two Americans and everyone else was from a different country. There were like 7, 8 of us. And they're just, you cannot have a conversation about the future. Like we had some, but the rest of them was like, okay, well, when are we going to see you all next? Like and you just couldn't because nobody knows. We don't know what countries are going to be blocked. We don't know like any of our travel plans because a lot of them, their borders are shutting down. Like there's just no way to really talk that far out into the future. I've had a lot of speaking engagements, a lot of a conference, not a conference, but a retreat that I was going to speak at got canceled. All my speaking engagements at Zest got canceled. No one knows when we're going to do those things again, right? So it makes sense that there will be a pause there, especially until the mind works through its emotions. Now, working through the emotional part of it, I know that for me, the experience I had to do, and this is what Pisces season is all about. So you're right there on track with the seasons. This is perfect. You're like, it's the time to wallow and to feel in. For me, it was acceptance, letting myself feel this state, and then eventually coming back to acceptance, feeling a state of mindfulness that recognized when that feeling was fulfilled, and then a narrative to pull me out of it. So what I mean by that is we have to accept that the state isn't just a fucked up state, right? Like I have to get over this wallowing so I can do X, Y, Z, right? Like it wasn't until I really sat down and was like, Pisces is all about emotions. Like I need to just have these melancholy blah experiences, right? And I like sat with it and my immediate reaction was to text everyone I know with a lot of Pisces energy and be like, I'm so sorry. I texted my former partner because she has a Pisces moon, and I'm like, I'm feeling my emotions. I've been feeling my emotions go all over the place the last week, and now I really feel how that feels. Um, I I I feel you. And she was like, yeah, I fucking know. Right. And I texted some other people. I'm like, life must be rough. Like, I'm sorry. Your emotional states are probably always like a little bit like this. And then life is like, well, you have to show up 9 to 5 and you have to do X, Y, Z, right? So that was kind of my way of like accepting, okay, this is Pisces, right? I'm gonna have this grumpy morning. Okay, cool, let's feel into it, right? um and then the acceptance that this is acceptable and there's a purpose for it, right? For me it was very much, okay, it's Pisces season, cool, now that gives me a goal, right? Feel it, experience it, do the Pisces thing, right? I'm like, okay, fine, I'm gonna do the Pisces thing. So I just like laid there and like felt into it, which is a luxury that I have with the job that I have. Like, it's different with people doing the 9 to 5, but you can make some time, hopefully. And if not, we need to create a new society where you can. So join the rebellion, right? Do the revolution so you can sit there with your feelings during Pisces season. Um, Once you've accepted that this is part of the process, it's a good part of the process, then you allow yourself to feel into it. Um, this is where mindfulness practice is very useful, right? When we're mindful and we're mindful of our breath and we're mindful of the inner experience, that is when you can start to get a better feel for what is a natural part of this process. And when do we like start holding on to it, right? And continue and plateauing it, continuing it out, because we're just like, well, it's actually kind of nice that I'm not doing anything right now. Or it's kind of nice to have this extreme of emotions. I can keep up with this swallowing a little bit. And the most I can say about that is it's really a practice of mindfulness that cues us into when that shift occurs. And then once you're mindful of it, that is when you summon up your narratives, right? Like, okay, yeah, I'm wallowing in my Piscean emotional whatever. I'm going to accept this as part of the season. I'm also going to accept this as grieving because so many things in my life have changed rapidly in the last month or two. And nothing I planned, and I have a lot of Virgo energy, I like planning, has come to fruition. So I'm going to, like, this makes sense that I'm in this state. Cool. Misery, 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 misery. Oh, I can move. Okay, am I going to be the person who goes in the temple now and prays, or goes to my altar and does a little ritual and then comes back and starts writing? Or am I going to do the whole clinging to misery thing? And my personal narrative is, look, I've worked through bipolar, I've worked through the depression, I've worked through like the mania, I've been in depression for decades of my life. I am like, I'll do it if I have to, but other than that, I'm fucking done with that shit. And I have books to write because I want to affect the world. I want to affect society. I want to help us imagine new ways of living, new ways of structuring society, new ways that can break us out of this fixed pattern that we're in. I want to be working with people, right? Because I want to be able to work with people on an individual way to accomplish that larger goal that I would have and vision that I have for society. So okay, wallow, 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 feel the energy shift. I'm going to jump on this now because my narrative is like, I've overcome that stuff in the past. I don't need to be there as much anymore. And I have these things that I want to be accomplishing, and that's who I am, right? And that's my calling. And there's a whole feeling of calling with the mystery and maybe destiny and something that empowers that, motivates that, and gets me out of bed to go and do those things, right? So acceptance of the state, and that's a tricky part, right? Because if we identify with the narrative a ton, that can make it very difficult to accept the state, right? Because I'm supposed to be this person who goes doing all these things. So we have to hold the balance,
Yeah.
right? Um, but I feel like that was my 4-point step: acceptance, feel into it, be mindful of the shift and change, act on it in accordance with the narrative that I have. And then from there, it's just a balancing act. And I mean, that becomes its own empowerment of a narrative, right? Because once you do that time in and time out, you start to have a new identity from, oh, I'm the person who holds on to the wallowing, because I've been there. I've fucking been there. I've been the person to hold on to the wallowing, right? To no, I'm the person who's cultivated this new sense of mindfulness where I can pick up on when it shifts and I actually do that and I play according to this new narrative. And now we have a new identity of self, which then now reinforces and strengthens that story that we're telling and that narrative that we're telling. And it builds on itself. That's been a really cool experience. I've had a lot of difficult experiences this last month or two. And it's been really cool to move from the old depression of like, will I ever survive all this? Like, life is so rough, to like, oh, I'm going to be back on my feet in a week or two. I might need to take a week to like grieve or like have a process. But I know myself now, and I know I got the tools. I know I'm connected. I know, like, for me, Yarevare will see me through. The mystery will see me through. Like, it's cool. Like, the narrative has experienced itself. It's proven itself enough times for it to really get some good traction going. And then we can delight. Sorry, I'm like running on, but I really love the subject. Then we can begin to really delight in the skillfulness of the process, right? I feel like that is like at the center of things. Like, there's the Japanese saying, like, live like, I don't even remember what it is, but essentially, like, live life to the best of your role, right? Like, play life like a game and do it well, right? Now our identity can start to shift from external goals, right? Like, how many rungs in the corporate ladder have I like gained? Like, am I married yet? Like, what are these like external goals? To, holy shit, I just went, there is a plague outside and I've had some friends die and like this happened, my dog died, this happened, that happened, all these external things happen. And like, I actually think I'm handling this really well, and I am using my tools and I am staying in touch with the mystery. And yeah, cool. It's this is good. And you start to self-identify and you start to self-value based on the one thing that you actually have control over, which is, to a point, because I think there's a lot of neurology that makes it difficult at times, but it's ourselves and it's our experience. And that is being able to come to a really healthy way of experiencing self and living self. Takes work, it takes effort, and it really is an art that needs time to be cultivated. So then you can start to appreciate the art of your psyche and what you've built, what you've painted in your life, right? Like, and the art of self and what you've cultivated. And that is awesome and gorgeous. And I'm going to stop rambling now. Thoughts?
No, I love it because you reminded me of something, and I just started thinking about this the other day, and I just thought of it as a blip, and then I was like, whatever. But like, I remember when I was little, I would just imagine. I'd always be thinking, like, and I think a lot, and I think a lot of people do this, is just be imagining, like what if my life was a movie right now? Like, what if there was some narrator just like telling what my life would, and I would sit there and I'd actually be going through stuff and narrating and like, oh, here's Rachel and she's sitting down at her desk to write in her diary today and she's feeling whatever. And then when I started traveling, I kind of brought that with me, and then it was enhanced a little more because when I was traveling, I was writing emails every week or so back to tell people my stories of all my travel stories. And it was so interesting because there was several times where something would just fall flat, fall absolute through, like not go the way I'd planned, and I'd stop. And, it's like I'm left with a 4-hour wait for a bus, or I missed something and now I have to like go sleep under a tree or something. And it's just like, and like what was interesting, and I realized that every once in a while I got like aware of it, and I was like, I'd stop and like, ooh, how is this gonna work into the story? Like, how are we gonna like do this story? Is this gonna be the like? And then she went on this crazy adventure, and then she did this. You know, like I'd start narrating it, and it's and then it kind of came back to today. You know, this time in my life too, and it's just like I'm like, this is can be such a cool story. Like if you were reading your life as a novel, like how is it gonna go? Like, is it like, oh, the world ends and then I sit in my house and mope about it? Or is it like, what am, it's like, and then I can start getting excited thinking about the narration. And it's like, and it's so interesting because it depends on the voice. You can have you can have the exact same situation, but depending on who narrates it, it's a completely different story. Like who's telling the story? Is it Samuel Jackson? Is it Bruce Willis? Is it what's his face? um Tom, oh, I can't believe I'm blanking.
David Attenborough.
Come on.
Like, it's just
The
very
drug author Thomas.
uh
Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. What's his name?
oh, hun, cultural references. I was too sheltered. Like, I don't know.
It's Thomas. It's something Tom. I can't believe I'm missing it. But I mean, there's all these different, um, and it's also funny too because now I'm on to my own story. But like, when I did my travels and then I was thinking my story and I think of how I tell it and how I like narrate it and stuff. And like for the longest time, I avoided having anything to do with Elizabeth Gilbert's oh geez, Eat, Pray, Love.
Mm,
Because I was like, oh, single woman, she went and had the exact same experience as I did. She traveled the world and had all this adventure, and like I'm just a copycat, and I want to keep my experience my own. And it wasn't until like last year, I think, I finally read her book and watched the movie, and I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, her story and her narrative is 100% different than what mine is. Like we did I mean, some similar stuff, but like her outlook, and it's just like, to me it's fascinating, and it's like I'm hoping there's a few people out there that will look at their situation and see it as a really great way of starting a story.
yeah,
you know
yeah,
like the shit hit the fan, everything collapsed, and then I did this. you know
yeah,
like doom.
yeah. I love that because, yeah, thinking back over times in my life when I was the most resilient, there were times in my life, for me, it was always thinking of like a character in a book. There were times in life where I had a very strong narrative. And then, yeah, things hit you, and it's like, well, okay, like this is a cool, interesting plot development. Like, what are we going to do here? Right. And it's the times in my life when I don't have as strong of a narrative that are the times that I drift the most. Right. And this is perfect for Pisces, right? Like Pisces, when you kind of dream up the character. Aries, internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but your video has stopped.
Okay, well, as long as we can hear. Um, Pisces is when you dream up a character. Aries is when you like kind of breathe some life and fire into that character and have it take action, right? So we're still in Pisces for people in the United States. You guys are over. It's the 18th. We're in Pisces for another day and a half, until the spring equinox, and then we move into Aries. So like, yeah, we have some time still to drift and dream. And then Aries is going to want a little bit more of a push. It's going to want to start that hero's tale. It's going to want to go out and start to blaze some trails. And that is very much what I'm hoping we do. That we start to generate a new collective narrative, a new collective story that identifies ourselves as in a unique point in history to make new changes. And part of that narrative, I feel, is very important to start to look at what is our personal narrative. What is our personal hero's journey, our personal hero's story? Um,
Yeah.
and how do we move forward with that, right? Because that our society is going to require that. A lot of the ills of our society occur because we have been running so unconsciously with these social programs or these larger structural programs and stories, right? We allowed, like, in the transition between the in the transition into the modern era and postmodern, right, we started really in the West dissolving a lot of our old traditions and stories and narratives. And then we kind of just ran with, oh, cool, free markets and capitalism and like new tech and like new ads and consumerism. And we didn't really make up new stories. We have Hollywood, but those aren't usually moralistic tales. They're not usually stories to like help cultivate a deeper insight. You have a lot that do that, right? But it's more storytelling for the sake of storytelling versus like the old traditions where it's like storytelling for the sake to kind of program, like Bali. Everything needs to come back to balance. Everything needs to come back to harmony. It's all about balancing. It's all about harmony, right? And so at the end of the day, when plague hits, they're like, we got family. It'll come back to like balance. Life is all about chaos. Happens a little bit, then dharma is established again. And freaking out about it doesn't help that dharma, right? So I think we had to break down a lot of the old traditions for very real reasons, because some of the time those beliefs were oppressive. They were oppressive to queer, like the LGBTQ community. It was oppressive racially, in a lot of different ways, right? Because we were running with European-centric traditions. But now is the time to recognize we need new stories, we need new narratives. We need to be able to find a way to recognize each individual's story and narrative and create a society that allows those to each flourish independently, rather than just running with this very unconscious, the world is a market and you got to do what you got to do to survive in that market, right? Like, um, and this seems to be the perfect time. Pisces, the Aries season every year is a great time to do that individually. Now it's a fantastic time to do that globally, right? And I think I want to tie in that second point from the very beginning, wherein we were talking about kind of people in the States are panicking. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of worry. And unless the government steps in right now, because the cultural safety nets aren't really established as much for the urban centers, maybe a little bit more for rural centers where you have your like rural churches and you have like a little bit more of a community. But in urban centers, where there's a lot more anonymous living, right? You don't necessarily know your neighbors. You got a few friends spread out across the city. They're going to definitely require some governmental support or something like that, right? So you were talking about feeling guilt over like how hard it's going to be in these areas, right? Because you weren't stressing out as much about the experience. And I feel like this is where narrative also comes into play, right? Is recognizing you've just stepped into your story before they have, right? So then what can we do with our story to help other people step into their stories, right? Like what can we do? Because it's like, yeah, like we could all live the narrative and the story of panic, but like that's not really going to get us anywhere. So it's not wrong to be able to have the story of like, yeah, I've meditated, I'm a little bit more zen. Like that's my character. I've done the character development points to get there. And I've got a vision of where I'm going. So my story doesn't need a panic with everybody else or feel guilty about it. It can look around and recognize that what's going on and that people are just living their kind of mass produced Hollywood epidemic stories. So how does my hero story play into this larger picture? And how can I help other people discover theirs, right? Or maybe your hero story isn't so much about the personal. I feel like yours would be a little bit more about the personal, but maybe someone's like realizes it's not so much about the personal as much as it is structural change. Like, how can I invent something new or come up with a new idea of how the larger structures can work? Or maybe it's, how do I grow a garden so people can eat, right? But we're all finding our hero story, and then we're finding, how does it interact with other people's hero stories? How does it interact with other people's roles? Which is another point I've been really wanting to develop, and I'll eventually get back to this. I don't think we have to go into it too much, but so often we ask, what do you do? And we're referring to a job position. We're referring to a job. How do you make your income, right? This is very capitalist. It runs with a capitalist narrative of how are you bringing in resources to pay for things, because that is the most basic important part of our society. It's kind of like, when did you last go hunting for a like hunter gatherer, right? It makes sense that it's been used, but it structures the brain, it structures dialogue, it structures society, it structures our lives, it structures our focus and our goals around this capitalistic framework, right? I personally want to start moving into what is your role, right? Because this now assumes that you have a role in relationship to other people with other roles, right? It takes us from that kind of more mechanical, how do you plug into the system and make your income, to how do you plug into a human community, right? What is your role in that community? And that becomes very similar. It opens up the door to ask more also, what is your hero narrative? Because that is where you discover your role in the community, right? Like, what is your personal narrative? What is your hero role? Like, okay, cool. You're going to continue to inspire us with beautiful art. You're going to be a storyteller. Like, I love your stories on travel and like just when things did not go like your way, and you're like, yes, I camped out in a graveyard. It was like, what else are you gonna do, right? Like the story of just like, yeah, you go with the you roll with it, right? Those are important stories for people to hear, right? So we got your storyteller now, right? You're a painter now, like you inspire, right? That's a amazing heroic role to be playing. That's an amazing role to be playing, right? And so I feel we get our narratives, we also need to start to change some of the pieces of our dialogues, right? And the way we refer to things. And if we're all in quarantine and we don't have much more else to do, now's the time to start to open up these talks. Like what turns a phrase? Change, right? How do we structure a new way of being? How do we talk about a new way of being? I feel like I'm kind of rambling now, and it's super.
No,
How is it now for you?
you know what I love? I won't get into this, but like this made me think. I was like, I want you to do a whole talk on creating a LinkedIn profile, because I had the worst identity crisis last week when I tried to write out my LinkedIn profile. And it was like, what do you do and what will people search you for and what's your like profession and what's your like expertise kind of thing. And I was just like, that is inspired. Like I couldn't do it. It's like I'm so lost. And just now you're giving me so much clarity. And I'm like, oh, this is so nice. Because it's like, yeah, I'm a storyteller through pictures and words, and it makes me sound like I'm distracted, but like you're making me work on my LinkedIn profile right now, like me too.
Awesome. Well,
Because I'm like,
in a totally tangent, like, I mean, that's an amazing view of how things in our lives give structure to our experience, right? And are affecting our experience, right? That was a very real thing that just recently happened to you that caused, I know when I look at LinkedIn, I think like immediately, like it's much more part of the capitalist system, right? Because it's very much about job and
yeah,
and skill sets.
what's your credentials?
I'm sorry, what?
What's your credentials?
Yeah, yeah. So I also had a very difficult time doing my LinkedIn profile. Um, and in a way, like this is a great exploration of the way that there's such a feedback loop in our environment, right? Like it causes us to start to think down that way. And you can rebel from that and be like, how do we make LinkedIn work for us, right? Like, how do I start talking about roles rather than jobs on LinkedIn, right? How do I start doing that with other social media things? But it's very interesting to note that some portion of your brain, some set of neurons, immediately related this back to this social media platform, because it's very real to us. It's a very real part of our life. It's a very real part of the system, and it has that feedback loop. Right now is the perfect time to be exploring our feedback loops amidst everything, right? What do I want to read? Like, my phone's right next to me. Like, the discussion has been so engaging, I haven't wanted to reach for it, but I find myself, like, if I'm writing, I'm constantly wanting to reach for my phone, right? It's a feedback loop. Like, what apps on that phone am I particularly looking for? What am I looking for from those apps, right? If we're going to start to imagine a new story, a new way of being, a new society, we have to become very mindful of all the things that are structuring the society the way it is right now, right? And thus structuring us in the feedback loop that occurs there, right? The back and forth that occurs there. Clearly, a level of identity is recently been caught up in LinkedIn, and it's going to be affecting a part of your identity and back and forth, right? Honestly, and now I'm like, well, my LinkedIn, I went pretty basic with it. I went pretty, like, I just went and I fit the mold and I like plugged it in because I was like, I don't really care about this thing, so I will just kind of fit the mold and put it in there. And I try to be a little bit more me on other platforms. And now I'm like, shoot, should I start the rebellion on LinkedIn? Like, is this what I rebel?
That's what I'm saying. I think this time, I mean, I don't know if no, I'm just thinking, I'm like, yeah, everyone's on social media right now. They're like, there's nothing else to do. We're locked off, but like, we're still not changing, you know, like, let's go revolutionize LinkedIn.
We'll start there. We can just like move from like,
Break
platform to
it
platform.
down.
This is the new culture. But like switch everything up to fit to it. And that's the like beauty of this is really, if you got enough people on board, if you had enough reach, we can be doing this. Like, the only reason why resources are getting so hoarded in the United States is because enough people started doing it, right? Like, we can see how mass effect occurs now, right? Like, you can transform a society in the way that it's operating, in the way that it is interacting with its environment overnight right now, based off of
Yeah,
its narratives, its stories, and its models, right? Like, so
yeah, yeah,
what if we start telling new ones and acting on them?
yeah, yeah. Well, and that reminded me of something I thought of earlier in our conversation, and that was like when I was thinking like what I'm learning from this is I was like, it would be really interesting to me if people could see like the spread of the virus, of the effect they have on people. And it's just like, everyone's like, oh, nothing really matters, but it's like, I can't remember resources again, but they were talking about like in one of the Asian countries, they did the whole thing where they had the first 30 cases and 30 cases, and they traced out, the few people that they affected and who they contaminated. But case number 31, I think that one person like infected like 1,200 people,
Oh wow,
like 1,200 more people.
they got
And it was just like, yeah, so I don't know what they were doing, but it's just like I'm looking at this as like my actions and what I do, if I thought of it as effective as, spreading a virus, it's like, yeah, you know, it can change people. Some people won't even notice me. Some people, I could devastate. Some people, you know, I don't, like I don't, I'm trying to figure out how, like I think I can see. I think maybe the virus will help people see what the kind of effect they can have on the world, and maybe that they can have a positive effect and not just be a contagion.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. What came up for me randomly there was almost a visualization of like seeing how many people are actually um, touched by the virus, right? Like how many people have actually like caught it. I want to say infected, but for some reason that feels like what? I don't know. My brain is how many people have been infected, right? And have that be like almost like a red line that connects people, and then the like a gray like tide of how much has been affected by the way we're reacting to the virus, right? And how much like more has been affected by the reaction and the story and the narrative and the way that we play all that stuff out, right? So we can really
Oh
start
yeah.
to appreciate the power of the story and the psychological piece versus the reality of the piece, right? Like reality, yeah,
Yeah.
this is not a fun scenario. Like, right, there are people dying. It is not like there are going to be tragedies in people's personal lives for people who are affected. There's so much more suffering, I feel like, especially in the States, from the reaction to it, right? And how much more impactful that is. And that is all story models and the emotions that arise around that, right? Like, what is leadership doing? What is the confidence in our society and our ability to have a social security net? What models and stories do we tell in Hollywood, which is our basic programming? That was always really interesting back in the day when I used to do psychedelics, was I would get to a certain place, and I grew up with Christian narratives, right? So for me, there was always a reset of like, oh shoot, if things go really dark, well, I'll just die and get reborn like Jesus, right? Like, like there's always a kind of like, okay, well, you just like there was always a reset where it couldn't get that bad for me, right? Um, and that helped me navigate a lot of very weird psychological states, both in using psychedelics, but also in depression and in these other experiences, right? Whereas I would see friends get a little bit further out there and they would start running like Doctor Who, or they'd start running other like cultural icons that weren't as thought through for like what lesson is actually teaching a person, right? And it would have interesting effects on them, right? When people started running these other like kind of just stories told for the sake of drama versus stories told for like the sake of like a deep like uh, rebirth story, right? A deep like transformational story, right? Um, which has always been an interest in me of like Hollywood versus meth, right? And what the effect that that has on our psyche. But I know my energy is winding down. It's super late for you. We've got a lot on here.
I'm fine.
Any closing words or anything you wanted to throw in there, and then we'll wrap this up?
Um, no, I'm excited to go watch the replay. I feel like we got so much in that I can't even quite soak it all in yet. So I don't want to add anything else to it.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I'm like, we would just, I know we can go on because we do. We go on all, like, Rachel and I, we talk like once a week. Like, I love it. Like, we could go on for hours. It's great. But yeah, I feel like we would just be going down another tangent here and there. Yeah, well, thank you for doing this. I've just like because I was imagining a community event thing, and I was going to record it for everybody, and then Rachel showed up, and I think other people were just busy, so no one else showed. And I was like, Rachel, like, are you cool if we record this thing? She's like, yeah. It's like super late for her. So I'm really appreciative of this. I do feel like we got a lot of really cool stuff out there. Thank you for like doing this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. You're welcome. Yeah, it was really helpful for me. So thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, yeah. Okay. thank you, everyone. Anyone who watches this who gets this far, like, you, you've worked hard.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah, I hope blessings on discovering your hero's tale and really having every resource, everything you need to be able to bring it into fruition, and gain insight on it. And when it's time to act on it. And may the whole world, may we all be doing that work, right? And hope, let's hope some things change from all this. Okay. Have a good night.
Amen.
Love and blessings.